Wel, Prynhawn da. Once again, I'm here to set out the conclusions of the latest 3-week review of the coronavirus regulations in Wales. My message today has to be a serious one. This is the third press conference in a row that I've had to speak against a background of rising coronavirus rates. Compared to only 3 weeks ago, the public health situation has deteriorated over that period. Cases have been rising across the UK, but Wales has the highest rates of all. Now, this is largely being driven by very high levels of infections in younger people and amongst family members and close contacts at home. Mistakes at a private laboratory in England, which resulted in thousands of people wrongly being told their tests were negative, may have further fuelled the growth in cases in South East Wales, and that's where the rates have been highest. And we have identified around 2,000 cases of a new and possibly more transmissible form of the Delta variant already here in Wales. All this means that the pandemic is very far from over, and it also means that it is even more important that we take all the steps we can now to keep Wales open and to keep Wales safe. Now, as you will see from this slide, at the start of October, we had hoped we would be past the peak of this Delta wave. The black line shows the actual cases of coronavirus we've seen in Wales. The dotted blue line shows how the Swansea University modelling estimated how the Delta wave would behave. 3 weeks ago, cases of coronavirus had begun to fall back in line with the model. But then, whereas the model continued to show cases falling, in reality, they have risen sharply. The rate in recent days has been as high as 370 cases per 100,000 of the population, the highest in the whole of the pandemic. The ONS infection survey estimates 1 in 40 people in Wales could have coronavirus. Now, in the last couple of days, cases have begun to reduce again. The next 3 weeks is about making sure that we get back on track with that model and see the numbers falling across Wales. Because with the high levels of infection we currently have in the community, it is inevitable that more people are being admitted to hospital because they are falling so seriously ill with the virus. More than 820 hospital beds across Wales are occupied today by coronavirus-related patients. And as you can imagine, this is putting even more pressure on our health and care services, which are already dealing with increased demand from all the other things we ask them to do. And very sadly, we have seen a rise in the last 3 weeks in the number of people dying with COVID-19, a rise that has continued since early September. Regularly throughout the pandemic, I've tried to pause in these press conferences just to remind us all that behind every one of those numbers lies an individual, a life, a family, people who are left grieving, and our thoughts continue to be with people who lose people close to them from this awful disease. Now, Wales has been at alert level 0 since the beginning of August, the lowest level of restrictions we've seen throughout the pandemic. And we want to keep Wales safe and to keep Wales open. To do that, we need to strengthen the measures we currently have in place to prevent coronavirus spreading even further and more people falling seriously ill. That will need everybody's help to reduce the spread of the virus over the next 3 weeks. When rates are as high as they are in Wales today, everything we do has an impact on the virus, and every contact we have counts. I must be clear. If rates continue to rise rather than fall, the Cabinet will have to consider raising the alert level and reintroducing some further restrictions at the next review. Now, of course, none of us want to see that happen. None of us want to see a return to restrictions in the economy or in our own lives. And that is why, over the coming 3 weeks, we will strengthen 6 measures, from the requirement to wear face coverings to changing the guidance on self-isolation. We're changing that guidance, the self-isolation guidance, to reflect the latest evidence about household transmission. You are more likely to catch coronavirus if you are living with someone who already has it. Self-isolation helps to break the chains of transmission and so prevent the virus spreading quickly through the community. People who are fully vaccinated or age 5 to 17 will now need to self-isolate until they have a negative PCR test if they live in the same household as someone who has COVID-19. This is similar to the system in place in Scotland, where cases peaked already and are now lower than they are here. Of course, if you test positive, you must self-isolate for 10 days, and self-isolation support payments of £750 a week continue to be available for people who are eligible. Over the next 3 weeks, we will also extend the COVID pass. We've made COVID passes compulsory in nightclubs and in larger indoor and outdoor events just a fortnight ago, and the implementation so far has gone very successfully. While cases are so high, we will extend their use to theatres, cinemas and concert halls in 2 weeks' time. These are ticketed indoor venues where large numbers of people come together, are in close contact with one another and are there for extended periods of time. And as I said earlier, if cases of coronavirus continue to rise rather than fall, we will have to consider expanding the use of the COVID pass further, including into the hospitality sector. Let me say something briefly next about schools. I want to thank, of course, the education sector for everything that has been done to reduce disruption and support students in what has been a challenging start to the autumn term. We already have an infection control framework in place that allows schools to make decisions about the measures they need to put in place to protect staff and learners. Further to support head teachers, we will publish a toolkit next week to help schools with higher numbers of cases to introduce more protections more quickly. And we will redouble our efforts to encourage staff and secondary school students to take up the offer of twice-weekly lateral flow tests to help to keep them safe. Regular testing, together with the protective measures, will help to keep coronavirus out of our schools. Now, when coronavirus infections are this high in the community, working from home is a really important measure to protect people's health and reduce opportunities for the virus to spread in workplaces. The Welsh Government is urging all employers to help more people to work from home over the next 3 weeks. The Welsh Government will lead by example and reduce the number of people coming into our offices. We're also meeting retailers to encourage them to do more to raise awareness of the legal requirement to wear face coverings in shops. And finally, in terms of these defences to vaccination, vaccination is our best defence against the virus, and it's never too late to become vaccinated here in Wales. Providing a booster vaccine to everyone over 50, all frontline health and care staff, everyone with an underlying health condition, and all care home residents will help to reduce infections, hospitalisations and deaths. It's a month since we started the autumn booster campaign in Wales, and already more than 400,000 people have had that vital booster injection. By Monday, we will have offered the booster to all eligible care home residents. Over the half-term, we focused on vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds, with many centres offering walk-in appointments. More than 40% of 12 to 15-year-olds have already been vaccinated, and all will have been offered vaccination by next Monday. So the next 3 weeks are vital if we are to keep Wales safe and Wales at alert level 0. Cases of coronavirus are too high across Wales, and we have to work together once again to bring them under control. We've done it before, and we can do it this time again. Together, we can keep Wales safe, and we can keep Wales open. Diolch o galon fel arfer I chi gyd. I'll turn now, as ever, to questions, and all the answers to the questions will be broadcast on the Welsh Government's own social media channels. And first this afternoon to Adrian Masters at ITV Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. And I've got two questions about the reintroduction of isolation for households. What steps are you taking to minimise disruption in a range of public services, particularly schools, but in other public services? For instance, if a teacher or somebody working in a public service has to isolate because one of their children has tested positive, what steps are you taking to make sure that that doesn't have an intended consequence of causing problems in other areas of public services?
Well, I think there are two things, Adrian, there. First of all, our aim will be to get those PCR test results turned around as quickly as we can. So PCR tests in those circumstances are, by and large, returned to people within 24 hours. So we are not asking, as we did earlier in the pandemic, people to stay at home for 10 days. As soon as somebody in your household falls ill with a confirmed case of coronavirus, get yourself a PCR test. It'll be back to you as quickly as the system can manage. And if it's negative, you can be back in the classroom or back in work as fast as that. And the second point to make is that we believe that in the round, this will actually keep more people in work for longer. Because if we are keeping people who are turning out to be positive contacts of household cases, and that is the majority of cases, or the largest single source of cases in Wales, if we are managing to keep people out of the workplace, then fewer people in that workplace will fall ill. So in the round, we think that this will result in fewer people being out of work or out of school than would be the case with numbers as high as they currently are in the community in Wales.
Thank you. And if I could ask you too about the advisory nature of that change, the fact that it's guidance rather than law, does that suggest that you suspect that people might not comply with the guidance? I'll put it in this way. This comes from 13-year-old Lizzie Jenkins, which is why it's expressed so well compared to the way that I could put it to you. Advice is not very helpful, she says. It's like they're not doing their jobs properly. They should tell us clearly what to do.
Well, Lizzie, thank you for that. Look, I can't be clearer. This is what we are telling you. If you live in a household and somebody else tests positive, stay at home, take a test, and only go back to school if that test is negative. It really is as clear as that. It's guidance because we have taken advice from our Scottish colleagues who have this regime in place already. They believe that it is effective as guidance, and so we will issue it as guidance today, immediately here in Wales. Just to say that, of course, our aim with all of this is to bring the numbers down again. And if we can manage to do that and get back to where the figures were some weeks ago in Wales, then we will look to try and lighten some of the additional measures that we're announcing today. So that's the other point to make, isn't it? We don't want these things to be there forever. We need them to be there in order to deal with the position we're currently in, get us in a better position, and then we'll be able to see whether that advice continues to be necessary. Adrian, thank you very much. Over to Sadia Chowdhury at Sky News.
Thank you, First Minister. The UK government is easing some rules, like the decision to remove countries from the travel red list. So why is Wales toughening restrictions that were already tightened?
Well, first of all, to say that we regret the decisions the UK government is making in relation to international travel. SAGE is very clear that we are almost certain, I think that's the phrase they use, to see a new variant emerge in the United Kingdom, and there is at least a possibility that that variant will turn out to be more resistant to vaccination than the current variant we have. We have long argued that the UK government should have built the defences higher against the importation of new variants of the virus from overseas. So we go along with what they do on international travel because in a practical way we have very little alternative, because most people from Wales who travel abroad do so from ports and airports outside Wales. But if it were in the hands of the Welsh Government alone, we would not be lifting those restrictions in the way that they have. We need to bear down on the number of people falling ill in the community in Wales, because we have literally thousands of people every day falling ill with coronavirus. And that is having an impact not just on hospitals, where the impact is real, but it's having an impact in the workplace and in our schools, with people not able to be in work, be in school, or go about their daily lives. And the measures that we've introduced today will help us, we believe, to turn the corner, to get those numbers coming down, and to be able to sustain Wales in the position we're in today. We have the lowest level of restrictions since the start of the pandemic. We want to keep it that way. SAGE says, act early, take those low-level first steps, because they will help you not to need to do more significant things later on, and that's the advice that we're following.
Thank you. And secondly, tomorrow, 70,000 rugby fans are set to pack into the Principality Stadium for the autumn internationals. Would you consider banning crowds at these games, and indeed Six Nations games, if COVID cases get too high?
We've no current intentions of doing that. I'll be at the game tomorrow. I'll be showing my COVID pass in order to get in, and that gives me the confidence of knowing that everybody else who is attending the game is either doubly vaccinated or will have taken a lateral flow test in the run-up to attendance. By putting those extra measures in place, we believe that we will be able to keep those venues operating in the way they are now for longer. And the experience we've had in some big football games in Wales since we introduced the COVID pass is that it's been very well managed, it's been very well observed by people attending those games, and provided we go on doing those small and simple things together and get the numbers to turn the corner and come down, we'll have no need to take those much more drastic actions of the sort, Sadia, that you were pointing to. Thank you very much. Draw I Owain Clark, BBC Wales.
Prynawn da Prif Weinidog, ac os cewn ni'r atebion nesaf yn y Gymraeg hefyd, fyddwn ni'n ddiolchgar tu hwnt I chi. First of all, on the extension of COVID passes to extended settings, can you confirm that you will definitely hold a Cynhadledd vote before that occurs rather than retrospectively? And given the result last time, how can you be at all confident that you could even push it through and win that vote?
Owain, we are planning to hold the vote in advance of the regulations coming into effect. That does need a bit of nifty footwork with a timetable and some cooperation from Senedd committees. I'm very pleased to say it looks like all of that will be possible, and our intention will be, provided we can get all that to happen today, that the vote will be held not on Tuesday of next week, but Tuesday of the week after, before the changes come into place. It will, of course, be for other parties to decide on how they will vote in that, but I do think it is right where you can to give the Senedd the chance to vote before rather than after decisions come into effect. I hope that the positive experience we've had with the COVID pass in Wales over the last 2 weeks and the contribution that it can make, given that numbers are significantly higher today than they were when the original vote was taken, that will persuade other parties in the Senedd that it is a sensible precaution to add the COVID pass into these other settings. So y bwriad yw I galw'r pleidlais cyn mae popeth newydd yn dod mewn i'r rym. I wneud hynny, bydd rhaid i ni heddi roi nifer o pethau yn ei le, ond mae'n edrych I fi nawr fel bydd hwnna yn gallu digwydd. Os ni yn gallu pleidleisio cyn bydd pethau yn dod I fewn, wel bydd e lan i'r pleidiau eraill, yr wrthbleidiau, I ystyried sut mae nhw'n mynd I pleidleisio. Y gobaith sydd â fi yw edrych yn ôl ar y bythefnos diwetha ac I weld y llwyddiant o'r mesurau ni wedi pethau sy'n yn ei le nawr yn sydd wedi bod yn llwyddiannus, bydd hwnna yn mynd I cael effaith ar pleidiau eraill ac ar ffaith mae'r nifer o bobl sy'n dioddau o coronavirus heddi wedi cynyddu gormod ar ôl y nifer oedd yna pan oedd y pleidlais reiddiol yn cael ei galw. So, roi popeth dy gilydd, y gobaith sydd â fi yw bydd yr wrthbleidiau, rai ohonyn nhw, yn fodlon I helpu ni I roi y gyfraith newydd yn ei le.
Diolch yn fawr I chi ac yn Gymraeg hefyd ar hwn os gwelwch yn dda. The variants you were talking about, the 2,000 cases identified in Wales, or the slightly different Delta variant, if you like. What evidence have you got, if at all, about whether or not that is more dangerous in terms of transmissibility or spread? Or could you argue that it is a convenient warning for you, maybe to perhaps get your message across to people to adhere to the rules as they are now? Have you got any concrete evidence that this is a more dangerous state of affairs in terms of variants than we've had before?
So we do know that there are over 2,000 cases of the new type of Delta variant in Wales already. The evidence is preliminary on 2 scores. Is it more transmissible? Do people fall more seriously ill? Well, the preliminary evidence is that on both counts the answer is yes, although not at hugely increased levels. Now I want to just emphasise 2 things there. One, it is preliminary. So there will be more research and more evidence will emerge. And the additional transmissibility and the additional seriousness in the figures I've seen is at around the 10% level. So you remember that the Kent variant was 70% more transmissible than the original variant. So although this could be, when those figures are further investigated, the new variant could be more transmissible and more serious, it doesn't look as though it will be at the higher end of that impact. But when you have 730 people in every 100,000 falling ill from coronavirus in Wales, 10% of a large number is a large number, and we don't want that. That's why we are highlighting it today as a further factor in the context that has led to our decisions. So mae fwy na 2,000 o bobl yng Nghymru ar hyn o bryd yn dioddau o'r amrywiolyn newydd o'r Delta. Mae ffigurau, mae nhw'n newydd yn dod trwy'r system, so dwi ddim yn eisiau rhoi gormod o pwysau arnyn nhw. Beth mae'r ffigurau dwi wedi weld yn dangos ar hyn o bryd yw, mae'r fwy o bobl yn mynd I cwmpo'n dost gyda'r amrywiolyn nesaf, ac yr effaith ar rai bobl yn mynd I fod yn fwy na'r variant yr amrywiol sydd 'da ni a hyn o bryd. Ond ffigurau newydd ydyn nhw, bydd fwy o gwaith i wneud, ac mae'r effaith biti 10% fwy, nid fel oeddwn ni'n weld gyda'r alpha, a'r amrywiol alpha, oedd hwnna'n 70% yn fwy nag oedd yr amrywiolyn reiddiol. So, can i weld, mae mwy o gwaith i wneud, fwy o'r ffigurau i dod trwyddo, a hyn o bryd, dyna beth dwi wedi weld yn dangos. Owain, thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. Over to Will Haywood at Wales Online.
Thank you, First Minister. You have indicated that if the virus isn't under control, you will increase restrictions at the next review, including COVID passes for pubs and restaurants. What level of the virus would trigger this? Would you consider reintroducing restrictions if cases are stable but still at the levels they are now? And what if it was falling but not falling particularly quickly? Would you still bring in measures? And have you seen any evidence that COVID passes have actually resulted in a fall in the virus in the last 3 weeks?
On the final point there, well, the COVID passes have only been in operation for the last 2 weeks. I think it is too early to be able to offer definitive information on the extent to which they are making a difference, given all the other factors that you have to try and analyse at the same time. In answer to your first point, I think the crucial thing is less a specific number than the direction of travel. If coronavirus continues to increase in Wales, as it has at each of the last 3 reviews, we will reach a point where its impact in society and in the health service is such that further measures will be unavoidable. If we can stabilise and reverse that trend, then that will allow us, I believe, to remain where we have been for the last 9 weeks, with the lowest level of restrictions that we've seen since coronavirus began. So, for me, it's not at the moment a matter of being able to say, oh, if it's this number up or that number down, it's the trend. Trend up, we're in trouble, and other things will need to happen. Trend down, and we'll be able to stay with a level of restrictions that we've managed for the last 9 weeks.
Thank you. If COVID disappeared tomorrow, the Welsh NHS would still be in a pretty poor state with low morale, long waiting lists and flu season coming up. If flu was totally out of control this winter with cancelled elective surgeries, high death rates and beds in corridors, would you consider a lockdown because of the flu, bearing in mind that this kind of thing wasn't actually that unusual in winter before coronavirus? So would you actually consider a lockdown because of very high flu rates and associated deaths?
Well, look, you are right. If coronavirus disappeared tomorrow, the impact that it has had on the health service for the last 20 months wouldn't disappear with it. We have a workforce who are exhausted by the experience that they have lived with, and that is going to take time to recover. We have the backlog of other types of treatment, and that wouldn't disappear even if coronavirus were to end. So you are right to say that even if by some miracle, and it's not going to happen, is it? Coronavirus did just disappear, we'd still be dealing with its consequences. But we have dealt with difficult flu seasons. There was one during the time that I was the health minister, where the health service came under huge pressure immediately after Christmas. But we didn't need to respond to it by general lockdowns in the economy and in our personal lives. The health service has tried and tested ways of dealing with flu seasons, difficult flu seasons. There's a chance for me just to say to everybody, people will be being called for their flu vaccines as well as their coronavirus vaccines. I was myself earlier this week. If you're offered a flu injection, please take it, because in doing so, you will help avoid the sort of impact that Will was referring to in his question. Will, thank you very much. Over to Caitlin Parr at LBC.
Thank you, First Minister. We've heard accounts of people not having their COVID passes checked while going into clubs and live music events here. With this in mind, why is it a good idea to extend the programme to cinemas and theatres today? And will there be more of a crackdown on the rules?
Well, the rules are very clear that all reasonable measures must be taken to check COVID passes. I saw myself the reports from the football game in Swansea, where Cardiff were playing there, and the club, through fantastic organisation, checked the pass of every single person. More than 20,000 people going into a football game in a compressed period of time, they checked every single pass. To my mind, that tells me that if you're dealing with smaller numbers of people over a longer period of time, as you would be in other venues, there really is no reason why those venues cannot organise themselves in order to comply with the law. So that's my main message. You know, the law is there for a reason. It's there to help those venues to stay open, and they need to do things that help themselves to make that happen. Now, when we are talking about the further settings, those are theatres, concert halls and cinemas, you have to show your ticket already to get in. So this is, this is not an additional, completely different measure here. Alongside showing your ticket, you'll need to show your coronavirus pass. I've had to do it myself in a number of places recently. It is very easy. It is very straightforward. But once you've done it, you will know that if you're sitting in the cinema, there's one person sitting next to you on one side, one person sitting next to you on the other side. You will know in future that those people have been either doubly vaccinated or have shown a very recent test. And I think that will give more people confidence to come out and go to those venues than when, at the moment, you really wouldn't know.
Thank you. And what will these soaring rates of coronavirus mean for students as we approach winter and the festive period now? Because last year, when rates were lower, there was a concern about students being advised not to see family and friends or travel home, be that within the UK or abroad. Has that changed a year on following the vaccine rollout, even if rates are higher than they've ever been in Wales?
Well, the good news here, Caitlin, is that the level of coronavirus spread amongst our student population is actually being very effectively managed. I've had conversations recently with 2 Welsh universities where the number of people who are falling ill is at the bottom end of the spectrum. So while numbers in the community are far too high and we need to bring them down, the way that the higher education sector has managed the return of students to Wales, I think has very successfully contained the spread of coronavirus in that population. That means we're not at the moment having to issue the same sort of advice as we did last year. I'm sure individuals will still think carefully about travelling, about who they meet, about vulnerable family members who they might be in contact with. But because of the success of the vaccination programme and the way that universities have managed things themselves, things are better for our student population than they were this time 12 months ago. Thank you very much. Draw I Meleri Williams, newyddion S4C.
Yn da, Prif Weinidog. Yn gyntaf, hoffwn i ofyn i chi, chi wedi peintio darlun digon anobeithiol i ni heddi o ran sefyllfa'r feirws gyda chyfraddau uchaf y Deyrnas Unedig yma yng Nghymru a rhybydd am amrywiolyn newydd hefyd. O ran y rygbi, o ystyried mae nid dim ond 70,000 o gefnogwyr sy'n dod i Gaerdydd ffordd i fod yn rhan o'r dorf yn y stadiwm, ond bydd miloedd o bobl hefyd yn dod i'r tafarndau ac i fwynhau yn y bariau. Wrth edrych ar y mis sydd yn blaenau ni, ydych chi'n meddwl bod chi'n gwneud penderfyniad cyfrifol yn gadael i dyfarndau parhau i weithredu heb gyfyngiadau?
Wel, bob tro pan dwi'n dod at yr wythnos ola yn y tair wythnos, mae'r cabinet yn ystyried popeth sydd o flaen ni, y cyngor ni'n gael oddi wrth, yr prif swyddog meddygol, y sefyllfa mae'r awdurdodau lleol a'r heddlu yn rhoi ato ni. A'r uchelgais y Llywodraeth yw i cadw cyfyngiadau mor is mae'n posibl pan ar yr un amser ni'n warchod iechyd pobl yma yng Nghymru. Mae'n anodd bob tro chi'n trial i delio gyda nifer o'r ffactorau a posibiliadau, a hyn o bryd, beth ni wedi cyhoeddi heddi, a gyda'r help bobl yng Nghymru, ni'n meddwl allwn ni bod ymlaen gyda'r lefel o cyfyngiadau sydd da ni ac weld y ffigurau dwi wedi bod yn siarad amdano heddi yn dod I lawr. Maleri was asking me about the 70,000 people who will come to the rugby on Saturday and all the other people around Wales who will be enjoying the game and will be going out to pubs and other places to enjoy it, and was asking, is that consistent with the challenge we are currently facing? And my answer was to say that the Cabinet at the third week of the 3-week cycle tries to take into account a whole range of information that we have from our medical advisors, from the advice we get from our local authorities and the police and others. Our aim is to retain the lowest possible level of restrictions on daily life in Wales, consistent with attending to people's health. When you balance it all up with the additional actions that we've announced today, we think that that is the best balance we can strike in keeping society open, getting the numbers to come down. I've said several times today, our twin aims: keep Wales safe, keep Wales open. And the balance we struck today is designed to do just that.
A cwestiwn byr yn ail os gai. Pan mae Cymru sydd ar cyfraddau uchaf yn y Deyrnas Unedig, ond ni sydd ar rhan fwyaf o gyfyngiadau neu fesurau yn dal I bod mewn lle, ydy pobl wedi stopio gwrando?
Wel, dwi ddim yn meddwl mae hwnna'n wir. Ni'n lwcus yma yn Cymru, mae y mwyafrif fawr o bobl yn dal ati I helpu a wneud popeth bach ni'n gallu wneud yn y bywydau ni. Mae patrwm yr coronavirus dros 4 gwlad yn y Deyrnas Unedig wedi newid dros y cyfnod o coronavirus I gyd. Nôl yn yr haf, oedd y lefelau yng Nghymru o fwy is na unrhyw wlad arall am wythnosau. Nawr ni'n lan ben top, os ni'n llwyddo gyda popeth ni wedi gyhoeddi heddi allwn ni weld y ffigurau yn dod I lawr. Mae nifer o resymau pan ni'n yn y sefyllfa ni yn. Llwyddiant ein raglen brechu, ac yn nawr ni'n weld yr effaith o'r brechiad yn mynd I lawr, peth bach. A ffaith oeddwn ni lawr y gwylod yn y Deyrnas Unedig nôl yn yr haf, mae'n golygu mae fwy o bobl yma yng Nghymru I dal yr amrywiolyn delta nag yn rai gwledydd eraill. So, nid achos mae pobl yng Nghymru ddim yn gwneud ymdrech, ond pethau eraill yn eu cyd-destun, dwi'n meddwl, yn helpu ni I deall beth sy'n digwydd, ac y bwriad yw, wrth gwrs, I cael y nifer o bobl sy'n dioddau o coronavirus lawr yng Nghymru dros y 2 wythnos nesaf. Maleri was asking whether the fact that we have currently the highest levels of coronavirus in the United Kingdom, does that mean that people have stopped listening to the messages? Or the fact that coronavirus remains here and in Wales. My own view is that that isn't the primary explanation. The great majority of people in Wales continue to play their part in the small things we do in our daily lives to keep coronavirus under control. We don't have a complete explanation of why the position is as it is, except that over the whole period of coronavirus, you've seen this sort of pattern. At different points, different countries have the highest figures, and at different points, every one of the 4 nations of the United Kingdom has had the lowest figures as well. Our vaccination programme started early. We vaccinated a lot of people very quickly. The waning impact of vaccination may be part of the explanation for the figures we're seeing today. And the fact that over the summer, for weeks and weeks, we had the lowest figures in the United Kingdom may mean that there is a greater reservoir of people in Wales than elsewhere who are vulnerable to the Delta variant. I think those explanations are more likely to lie behind the figures that we see, rather than a sense that people in Wales have stopped playing their part. I think they still do that, and we need them to do that even more over the next 3 weeks to turn the corner and get these numbers coming down again. Maleri, diolch yn fawr I chi. Lan I Tom Magna, Carers World Live.
Thank you very much indeed, First Minister. You've described the background of rising COVID cases. It seems to us an increasing number of Welsh hospitals are asking families to take patients home before they're ready for planned discharge. Coupled with this, I understand there are new powers under the Mental Capacity Act to place people in residential care without any form of notice or family impact assessment. Viewers are telling us that all of this is happening with no immediate support in place, no sign of fast-tracked carer or needs assessment, for example, to back them up. How are already pressurised unpaid carers expected to cope in such suddenly changed circumstances if they're not involved from the start in hospital discharge planning?
Well, I wouldn't expect them to be in that position, Tom, nor would I expect them to have to deal with that. I've no figures and no accounts at all that come to me of people being discharged before there is a plan in place. What I do know is that there are over 1,000 people in hospital beds in Wales today who don't need to be there at all, but where the struggle to get those plans in place is preventing them from being discharged. So, the position in Wales is clear. Nobody should be detained in a hospital bed when they are fit enough to be able to be looked after in their own home, where no doubt they would much prefer to be. But that's got to be done in a proper way. It's got to be done on the basis of a plan, and it's got to be done with proper involvement of family members and carers particularly, who will be part of looking after that person on the next stage of their journey. And we don't have plans, certainly, to use the sort of draconian measures that you mentioned to circumvent what ought to be those proper procedures, while recognising that anybody who is unnecessarily in a hospital bed means that somebody who does need that bed is having to wait for it for longer.
Thank you for that. We'll certainly be looking into this issue. On a different point, I think it was around March this year that you planted a tree to remember those who died of COVID and what Wales as a nation had been through. Viewers seem to remember there was an allied promise of one or more meadows to come to build on this single tree. Viewers are asking what's happened and suggesting that if it was only one tree, it may have been, in their words, a publicity stunt. What's the latest?
So the latest is that we are well advanced now in securing the ground that we need in the north of Wales. And I'm hopeful the planting will begin there during this autumn and winter season. You can only plant trees at certain times of the year. There is an identified site in South Wales where negotiations with the people who are selling that piece of land are continuing. They're not as far advanced as they are in the north, where I feel more confident that that will definitely now happen. But in both cases, we continue to pursue the plan we originally proposed. We do want to have woodlands in different parts of Wales where trees will be planted to remember those far too many people who have died in Wales during coronavirus, and where their families will be able to visit, and where these will be places of quiet remembrance, where people will be able to reflect on the lives that have been lost, to remember them in their own lives, and to celebrate everything that they would have stood for in those families and in those communities. Tom, thank you very much. And finally, today, over to Harry Hansen at That's TV South Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. According to a recent survey carried out by professors at both Cardiff and Swansea University, more than 50% of people in Wales aged 18 to 25 feel they are in need of mental health support due to the impact that coronavirus restrictions are having on their lives. So putting in place these extra measures today is undoubtedly going to have more of an impact on our young people. What is the government planning to do to provide this much needed help for our younger people as we enter this next phase of the pandemic?
Well, Harry, thank you very much. That is a message which I hear every time I speak to groups of young people, the impact that coronavirus has had on their sense of mental health and well-being. When you bury a little bit below the headline and you ask people what sort of help they would prefer, generally they are very clear with you that they are not looking for a sort of clinical mental health response. They don't want to see the difficult experience they've been through turned into, you know, a mental health condition. What they're looking for are lower level services, services that you don't need to be referred to, services that you can walk off the street and find somebody who will be skilled and equipped enough to be able to talk through with you the impact that coronavirus has had, whether that is a teacher or a youth worker or somebody in a community mental health third sector, voluntary sector group. And our efforts in recent times have been focused on trying to strengthen those first line services that people don't need to have a referral through a doctor to get hold of. So we have increased our funding in our schools, increased the capacity for school counselling services there. We've invested in some third sector organisations to offer that walk-in off the street. And for some young people who would prefer to get help online, there are new ways in which you can yourself get expert help that's available to you without needing to speak directly to anybody else at all. And that's the final point, really, that I think I've learnt from my conversations with young people, is that you need a variety of routes to provide that help, because what one person will find useful will not be the same as somebody else would prefer to use.
Thank you. And following on from that, you mentioned schools. Do you believe that schools should be given more support to provide mental health support to their students, especially as many of them deal with the challenges that going in and out of school closures due to a rise in cases presents?
Yes, I think that's been our view for quite a long time, that we have to strengthen the ability of schools to deal with the well-being consequences, not just the physical consequences, but the well-being consequences of coronavirus. Now, we're trying to do that in a wide variety of ways. We're trying to make sure that our qualifications approach for this coming round of exams next year recognises the experience that young people have gone through, and we pitch what is expected of young people in a way that is proportionate to the experience they've had. We have already put extra money into, as I say, those sort of frontline school counselling services, but we are also spreading to every local authority in Wales the CAMS InReach service. So CAMS is the Community Adolescent Mental Health, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. It is staffed obviously by specialists in that field. Sometimes if you're working in a school and you are trying to respond to the needs of a young person, you may need the advice of someone who has a greater depth of expertise than you do in those areas. And making the CAMS InReach service, as it's called, available in every local authority in Wales is another part of the way in which we are trying to strengthen the defences that schools will be able to mobilise to help with young people who are continuing to deal with the impact of the virus in their daily lives and in their education experience as well. Harry, thank you very much. Thanks to everybody for today. Diolch yn fawr.